The old woman woke before the dawn, as she always did, to feed the fire and listen to the wall breathe. It was only the wind, the younger one said, if they spoke of it at all. The moan and sigh of the ice was nothing more than winter's voice, the vast white rampart shifting under its own weight. They said that to each other when the night pressed close and the shadows in the forest huddled at the edge of their firelight. The old woman let them. The young needed lies to sleep. She listened now with ears gone thin as parchment, wrapped in a ragged cloak of wolfskins by the low flames of their hidden camp. The forest around them was a black skeleton, the only light the faint glow of embers and the far, far shimmer on the horizon where the wall rose, a darker band against the infinitesimal gray that spoke of approaching day. "Grandmother," a boy's whisper, close at her shoulder. "Your turn with the stew. I've no teeth left for your thin stew," she muttered. "Keep it." "Listen." The boy frowned. She saw it in the shadow of his face. "To what?" "The wall." "I don't hear anything," he said. "That's because you're listening with your ears." Her lips cracked when she smiled. "Listen with the bones." He made a small, exasperated sound but fell silent. Around them, the other shapes of their band lay sprawled in cloaks and furs, exhausted from the night's march. They were a small group, what remained of a once larger clan that had fled the dead things in the forest and the white shadows behind them years before. Others had gone south of the wall, pleading for mercy from black-clad crows. The old woman had taken these few aside and come to this place instead, close enough to see the Great Barrier whenever the clouds parted. She had been born in its shadow. She would die in it. There came again a slow grinding thrum that seemed to move through the frozen earth itself, more felt than heard. It was like the groan of an old man rising from his bed, or the complaint of a great tree bending under too much snow. Only this was deeper, older, a sound that had begun before her first foremother stood naked and afraid in the snows and had not stopped in all the long centuries since. But it was changing. "Do you feel it?" she asked quietly. The boy shifted, drawing closer, his breath a small white cloud. His hand, when it crept into hers, was shaking. "It's louder." "Not louder," she said. "Nearer." The wall sat on the world's northern edge like a line drawn by a god's finger, 300 miles of frozen height. It did not move. It had never moved. Yet when she closed her eyes, the old woman could see it not as men said it was, but as her grandmother had whispered to her in the deep of winter, when the winds howled and she had thought the night itself would peel their souls from their bones. "It is not a wall, little mouse. It is a back." She opened her eyes. The first crumbs of light were falling on the distant horizon. The ice shimmered faintly, a ghost-white gleam against the growing day. For a heartbeat, no less than that, she thought she saw something vast and dark stir beneath the surface, like the shadow of a whale beneath frozen water. The earth shivered. Snow rattled from the skeletal branches around them. The boy snatched his hand away. "Earthquake," he said too quickly. "Sometimes there are earthquakes." The shaking faded. The soft, slow thrum faded with it. "It is rolling over," the old woman whispered. "Don't say such things. You think the old tales are only tales?" Her voice was thin as air, but it cut. "You think the wall is only ice, only stones and frozen water and dead men's oaths? Your father thought that. Where is he now?" The boy flinched as if struck. His father had risen in the night one winter, sword in hand, to stand alone between their camp and the advancing dead. They had found what the whites had left the next day. The boy had not wept then. He did not weep now. "There are others," he said after a moment. "Other clans south of here. We should go. If the dead come." "They will come," the old woman said. That much was certain. She had seen them in the fire and in the ice. But not yet. Something else is waking. "What?" She looked back to the wall, its vastness swallowing the horizon, its surface catching the faint first light of dawn. Men had poured their sweat into that barrier for thousands of years, had told themselves that they were its masters and guardians. The old gods laughed at such thoughts. She could almost hear them in the faint creak of the distant ice. An old thing, she said. A hungry thing. A thing that remembers when the world was younger and men had no names. He gave her a frightened look. What does it want? She might have said everything. She might have said nothing. The truth was she did not know. The dreams that had come to her in recent weeks had been full of snow and cracking ice, of red roots coiling through frozen flesh and a voice like a winter wind blowing through hollow bones. Wake. It wants to see the dawn, she said instead. High above them, at the top of the wall, men of the Night's Watch walked their patrol in the bitter cold, black cloaks snapping in the wind. They felt the shudder too. Some muttered a curse and blamed it on the frost heaving, on the weight of snow, on anything but the notion that the world itself might be shifting beneath their feet. One did not. Jon Snow stood at the very edge, gloved hands resting on the frozen stone of the crenellation, and watched the horizon pale. The air bit at any exposed skin like teeth. His breath came as clouds. The wall rose beneath him for 700 feet, dropping sheer to the forest below. He had climbed those stairs so many times they should have been as familiar as Winterfell's courtyards, but there was always a small part of him that marveled that he was up here at all and had not simply slipped and fallen into the emptiness of the air. Your cheeks are turning blue, you know, said a voice behind him. Might be you've finally decided to join the wall properly. Jon turned his head. Dolorous Ed trudged toward him along the walkway, cloak drawn tightly about him, his expression as mournful as ever. If the wall starts talking, it will have better sense than you, Jon said. Won't be hard. Ed came to stand beside him and peered over the edge, then thought better of it and stepped back. The bloody thing moved again. You felt that too? I thought it was my breakfast trying to escape. He stamped his boots against the frost-rimed stone. I've felt it a few times now these last weeks, like it's twitching. Jon glanced at him. Twitching? Ed repeated, with the stubbornness of a man who knew how mad he sounded and refused to yield an inch. Like a dog having a bad dream. If walls can twitch, which by rights they should not. The wall shifts under its own weight sometimes, Jon said, though the words rang hollow even to his own ears. Old stones settle, ice cracks, all at once, from Eastwatch to the Shadow Tower. He shook his head. If the whole 700 feet of it decides to twitch at once, I say we run. South, preferably somewhere without ice, snow, or things that want to kill us. Where would that be? Nowhere I've seen, Ed said, but I could die trying to find it. Jon looked away again, back to the horizon. The sky in the east was lightening, a thin, cold band of silver above the treeline. Somewhere out there, beyond the curve of the world, the sun would rise. Here, they saw only the reflection of its coming, a faint brightening of the endless winter. He had dreamed of the wall last night. He almost never remembered his dreams. When he did, they were a tangle of images. A red comet streaking across a black sky, a white wolf with eyes like embers, a vast weirwood tree whose branches filled the world, its roots coiling deep into the dark. But this dream had been simpler. He had stood in the forest below, looking up. The wall had towered over him, a cliff of blue-white ice that seemed to swallow the sky. Snow had fallen in slow, silent curtains. The air had been still. Then the wall had breathed. He had felt it in his bones, in the way the air had thickened and swelled before him. The ice had risen and fallen like a chest drawing breath. Frost had cracked and fallen from its surface in sheets, the sound like distant thunder. The entire world had seemed to lean toward him, the weight of 300 miles of frozen might focusing on the place where he stood. Wake, a voice had whispered. It had not been words, exactly. It had been the feeling of a word, the shape of an intent. Wake. He had woken with his heart pounding, his hand wrapped so tightly around the hilt of Longclaw beneath his blankets that his fingers had ached. It is only a dream, he told himself now. There were more pressing things to worry about than sleep visions and shifting ice. Cold reports had been coming in from the few rangers they still dared send beyond the wall. Dead villages, slaughtered game, tracks in the snow that were not human. Some bands of wildlings who had refused his offer to come south and live had been found days later, frozen in place, their eyes pale and empty. The ravens are restless too, Ed said. Molly says one bit him on the nose. Molly tried to kiss it, John said. He probably deserved the bite either way. Ed hunched his shoulders against the wind. There was a letter from Eastwatch. Cotter Pike says the sea ice is thicker than he's ever seen it. Says he hears things moving under it at night. Things that don't sound like whales. John's fingers tightened on the stone. And the wildlings? He asked. Those that came south are crammed in around the wall and complaining about everything. Those that didn't, Ed shrugged. Ghosts or bones now, I'd wager. John thought of Tormund Giantsbane, of the big man's easy laugh and the way he'd thrown his head back to tell tall tales by the fire. Tormund was south of the wall now with his people, camped uneasily near the ancient fortresses they had once sought to take. The wildlings chafed. The brothers of the watch muttered. John blinked at him. That's what I would say if I knew how to read her letters, Ed added. In truth, I've not seen any ravens from Winterfell these last few days. Could mean nothing. Could mean the bird got lost. Could mean the Bolton bastards have somehow risen from their graves to trouble us again. With our luck, I'd count on that last. Unease prickled at the back of John's neck. He had left Winterfell only a fortnight past. His sister had laughed at him in the Godswood and told him he still brooded too much for any man alive. And yet she had looked relieved when he had said he must return to the wall. It was where he belonged, she had said, where he was strongest. He wondered if she would still say that if the wall itself was shifting beneath his feet. I'd feel better if Sam were here, he muttered. Sam is warm in Old Town, buried in books, Ed sighed, and I am here, buried in snow. If there were any justice in the world, I'd be where he is and he'd be where I am, which would kill us both in different ways. It's not justice we were sworn to, Ed. No, Ed agreed. It's the wall, which, if there's any truth to the way my legs are shaking, is considering rolling over and squashing us all. John almost smiled. Almost. The sound came again. He felt it more than heard it. A deep, shuddering vibration that ran through the ice beneath his boots and up into his bones. It was as if the wall were humming to itself, an ancient and tuneless song too low for ears to catch. The edge of the walkway trembled under his hand. A fine dusting of frost shook loose from the merlons and drifted down into the darkness below like slow, glittering rain. 7 hells? Ed whispered, eyes wide. It is twitching. John stepped back from the edge, his hand going to Longclaw's hilt without thinking. Across the width of the wall, brothers paused in their duties. One man dropped a bundle of arrows. Another grabbed at a parapet to steady himself, breath hissing between his teeth. The shaking went on, stronger now, a pulse that seemed to grow and swell, building toward some unseen crest. Then it stopped. The silence after was sharp and absolute. The wind itself seemed to be holding its breath. It swallowed loudly. If that's your idea of a jest, Lord Commander, I don't like it. It's not my jest, John said. And I'm not Lord Commander. You're whatever the wall needs you to be, Ed said dourly. And right now, it might need you to tell it to go back to sleep. John exhaled, a cloud of steam. Go find Bowen Marsh and Othel Yarwick, he said. Tell them to double the watches and keep the men off the outer face as much as possible. If the ice is shifting, I don't want anyone falling. And if the wall decides to stand up and stretch, then we're all dead, John said. That's the most comforting thing you've said all morning. Ed pulled his cloak tighter around himself. I'll go and spread the cheer. He trudged away, shoulders hunched, leaving John alone at the edge of the world. He looked down again. Far below, the forest lay in its frozen stillness. He could almost see the faint glow of a fire deep among the trees, no more than a spark in the vast dark. Wildlings, perhaps, or something else. Ravencall carried oddly up here. Sometimes he thought he heard yells or laughter when there was nothing to explain it, only the murmur of wind and frozen stone. Wake, the memory of the dream whispered in him again. He touched the ice with his gloved palm. "Stay asleep," he said softly. "Just a little longer." In a cave far to the north and east, beneath a hill that frowned over a frozen lake, a boy sat rooted to a weirwood throne and saw Jon Snow's gloved hand press against the wall. Bran Stark's eyes were white. They had been brown once. They had watched his father ride out from Winterfell's gates, had watched birds wheel in a summer sky. They had been full of dreams of knighthood and glory. Those eyes were gone. In their place was the pale, sightless gaze of a green seer, the white tunnels through which the past and present and possibility all flowed in unending streams. He watched through the heart of the wall. It was not like warging into a beast. When he slipped into summer's skin, he felt fur and wind and the clean, hot joy of the hunt. When he slid into a raven, he felt the pull of air and the lure of carrion. This was different. The wall had no eyes, no muscles to clench, no heart to pound. It had something else. He felt it as a vast cold awareness, stretched thin and long along the world's northern rim. It was not awake, not yet, but there were stirrings at the edges of its sleep. Dreams rippled along its length. Memories of stone blocks quarried in distant hills, of ice overtopping ice as men poured water down its face to freeze in midnight watches, of giants' hands pushing huge slabs into place while children with eyes of sap and leaf whispered to the old gods in a language older than sunlight. Something was moving in those dreams now. Again came a voice from behind him, rustling like dead leaves over frozen snow. Bran blinked, and the wall receded. The cave came back. The drip of water, the glow of strange green light from the deep-rooted weirwood that made up the heart of this place, the smell of earth and old air. He felt the ache in his limbs where they lay half-buried in the tree's pale roots. He was no longer sure where his flesh ended and the wood began. He turned his head slightly. It took effort. The roots tugged at him when he moved. The three-eyed raven sat in his own nest of roots and bone. His body withered, his hair white and thin as cobweb. One of his eyes was gone, a dark hollow. The other was as pale as Bran's own, yet it seemed deeper somehow, a well of time that had no bottom. "You felt it," Bran said. His voice was hoarse. He could not remember the last time he had used it. "The shaking?" the old man asked. "I felt the trees stir. The ravens whispered of it. But you are the one who watched." Bran nodded. "The wall moved." "It is not a thing that should move," the old man said. "It was meant to stand, to hold." "It was meant to sleep," said another voice, small and high and full of the whisper of leaves. Leaf stood at the edge of the light, her bark-brown face tilted up toward the boy in the roots. Her eyes were green gold, catchlights of the strange luminescence that seeped from the weirwood's core. She had lived longer than Winterfell stones, longer than the kingdoms of men. Her people had stood on this land when ice first crept down from the north in ages no man remembered. She looked troubled now. "The wall was not ours," she said softly. "We helped bind it, but we did not shape it. The first men raised ice and stone. We wove spells through them, roots through earth. But the heart?" She shook her head, her hair of leaves rustling. "The heart was older." Bran licked his dry lips. "Older than the children? Older than men? Older than words?" Leaf said. Bran looked down at his hands. There were places where his skin had taken on the same pallor as the roots, where veins of red seemed more like weirwood sap than blood. He shivered, though the air in the cave. He was always cold. "What is it?" he asked. "What sleeps there?" The three-eyed raven's one eye half-lidded. "Names have power," he said. "The old ones used few of them for that reason. In the first tongue, they called it the Last Sentinel. In another language, forgotten now, they called it the World's Spine. The giants named it Brother That Lies Down. And others. And others." Bran asked when the old man fell silent. "Others called it Titan," Leaf said. Bran swallowed. He had heard the word in old Nan's stories, long ago in Winterfell's kitchens. Titans were things of stone and story, giants made of mountains and hatred, who strode the world in the dawn of days and crushed forests underfoot. He had always liked those tales. imagining huge feet stomping Lannister knights into the mud. He had not imagined them made of ice. "It was here before us," Leaf said. "Before the long night, before the dawn, before the walkers. It lay in the far north where the cold is older than the sky, where the world's bones lie close to its skin. It was not alive, not as you are alive. It did not think in the way of men. It was sleeping, dreaming, the way mountains dream and seas." "Why did you wake it?" Bran asked. Leaf's expression twisted. "We did not. The first men did," the three-eyed raven said quietly. "Or perhaps they only found it half awake and gave it purpose. When they came to this land from across the narrow sea, they brought their axes and their fires and their hungers. They cut down trees, broke the old places. They made war upon us and we upon them, until the walkers came and made war upon us all." Bran saw flashes of it as the old man spoke. Not in the words, but in the pulse of memory that flowed between Weirwood and Green Seer. He saw a younger world, a harsher world, where the sky seemed closer to the land and the cold burned. He saw an enormous shape lying half-buried in the far north, like a mountain folded in upon itself. Its skin was ice and stone and frozen soil. Its ribs were ridges of pale rock. It slumbered, and its sleep was long and slow and deep. He saw men, little more than children beside it, building walls of stone and pouring water that froze, layering ice atop ice along its length. He saw children of the forest standing among them, their hands raised, roots sprouting from the ground to wrap around the Titan's limbs like chains. He saw blood spill into the snow, mingling with sap, with ice, with stone. "They bound it," the old man said. "They coaxed it close to waking, then taught it to lie down, to stretch itself across the world's edge. They turned its back to the north and raised its spine to the sky. They made its sleep a wall." "But why?" Bran whispered. "To stop the dead," Leaf said simply. "The walkers came with their endless night. They broke armies. They shattered kingdoms that had never dreamed of falling. We could not stand against them alone, nor could the first men. The Titan had no love for us, nor for the walkers. It had no love or hate for anything. It knew only its own dreaming. We made it no fear," the three-eyed raven said. Bran looked at him sharply. "How?" "By showing it what would become of its dreams if the walkers triumphed," the old man said. "By sending it visions of a world where all things lay frozen, where nothing moved, where even the slow thoughts of stone could not find purchase. We whispered to it through roots and blood and sacrifice. We did as we had to do." There was no pride in his voice, only weariness, and so it rolled onto its back to shield us. It stretched itself between mountain and sea and let men raise their fortresses upon it. It slept there, at the edge of the world, holding back the dark. "Until now," Leaf added. Bran closed his eyes and reached again. He flowed along roots and ice veins, through cracks and fissures too small for any living thing to pass, up into the wall. He felt the press of cold like teeth. He felt the memory of countless hands, of shouts, of stones fitted, of torches burning in the night. He felt the marks that wildling raiders had carved into the ice over centuries, curses and boasts, crude faces and symbols long forgotten. He felt steel blades clang against the parapets. He felt ravens' claws, and beneath all that, deeper than deep, he felt a slow, immense heartbeat. He had not noticed it before. It had been too faint, too far away. Now it was closer. It was not like a man's heart, a quick flutter in a small chest. It was vast, each beat spaced out over minutes, maybe hours. It was more like the shift of tides, the turn of seasons. "Wake," it whispered, and Bran realized with a jolt that the thought was not directed at him. "Something is calling to it," he said. "Yes," the old man said. "The walkers," Bran asked. "The others." "They would break it if they could," Leaf said. "Shatter its back and let the cold pour through. The horn of Joramun, the old stories say, will bring down the wall. But the horn blows already." Bran saw it then, far to the north. A tall figure of ice and shadow, pale blue eyes burning in a dead face, standing upon a ridge. Around him clustered others of his kind, their armor shimmering with frost. In the valley below, an army of dead men stood as still as the trees, their heads tilted toward the wall, empty eyes unblinking. The Night King raised his hand. A sound rippled through the air, so low that no living ear could have heard it. It was not a horn in the way men knew horns, no trumpet of bone or bronze. It was the scream of ice under impossible pressure, the sound of glaciers grinding mountains into dust, the groan of frozen seas heaving against shore. It rolled across the frozen land in a wave, striking the wall like the fist of a god. The Titan's heart stumbled. Bran staggered in the roots. All at once the heartbeat he had been listening to faltered, then surged. Wake, in the south, still staring over the wall's edge, Jon Snow heard the ice groan. He did not know what had caused it. He did not hear the death horn the Night King had sounded. All he knew was that there was a noise building beneath his feet, a deep rumble that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. The walkway shuddered. He grabbed the nearest Merlin with both hands and held on. The wall was moving, not the small, almost imperceptible shifting of frost and stone that he had felt before. This was different. This was a roll, a heave, as if the entire 700 feet of height and 300 miles of length had decided to shrug. "Get off the edge!" a brother shouted somewhere to his right. "Mother's tits!" someone else yelled. "It's going to come down. Hold!" Bowen Marsh's voice cracked. "Hold the line. It's just the ice." No one believed that. The rumbling rose to a roar. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface of the ice before Jon's eyes, spreading along the length of the wall in jagged white lightning. Huge blocks shifted, grinding against each other. Snow plumes erupted from the face, cascading down in thundering avalanches. Jon felt his stomach lurch. The wall was breathing. It rose beneath him, a slow swell of ice and stone and magic, lifting him higher into the freezing air. Men cried out as they toppled to their knees, grabbing for anything solid. Some slid toward the outer edge, scrambling, clawing at the frost-slick stone to keep from sliding off entirely. Others fell inward, toward the yard far below, their screams snatched away by the wind. "Grab him!" Jon shouted, lunging for a brother whose gloved hands were skidding toward the abyss. He caught the man's forearm and yanked with all his strength, dragging him back behind the Merlins just as the wall lurched again. This time it felt like it was pulling itself up. Far below, in the forest, the old wildling woman stared in wonder as the horizon changed. The wall had always been a line, a sheer, unwavering line, cutting the world in two. Now, for the first time in her long life, she saw that line bend. It rose in places, the top edge rippling like the spine of some enormous beast shaking off snow. Ice cracked and fell in cascades, the distant forts along its length. Tiny bumps from where she stood, like barnacles on a whale's back, toppled and reformed as the stone beneath them shifted. "Grandmother," the boy whispered, clutching at her cloak. "What's happening?" She smiled through her terror. "It is waking," she said. "The wall remembers it has bones." At Castle Black, bells began to clang, almost inaudible at first beneath the roar of shifting ice, then louder as men recovered enough wits to seize ropes and ring. The sound was wild and uneven. There was no signal for the world ending. Jon forced his way back from the parapet, dragging the half-fallen brother with him. The man's eyes were huge white rings in his soot-dark face. Inside, Jon shouted, though his voice was lost in the thunder. He cupped his hands around his mouth and tried again. "Get off the wall! Inside!" Some heard him and staggered toward the stairway tower. Others simply ran, stumbling along the swaying walkway, thrown off balance each time the ice beneath them shifted. Far below, the great gate in the wall's center groaned as its ancient mechanisms tore and split. The portcullis sank, then rose, carried on the flexing of the ice around it. Jon looked down and wished he hadn't. The face of the wall, once sheer, was bulging. It was subtle at first. The ice seemed to push outward, then contract, then push again. Pattern emerged. Not random, not the aimless cracking of winter. It was rhythmic. The wall was taking a breath. He felt something in his own chest respond, like the ghost of that vast inhalation brushing his lungs. The air grew colder, impossibly colder, as if the world itself were inhaling through a mouth of ice. His exhaled breath froze around his face in a thin crust. "Northern gods," he whispered. "Old gods. What did you bind here?" "Wake," the Titan thought, and the word was like the grinding of mountains. His dreams had been long and slow. Once it had lain beneath an open sky in the far north, feeling the faint warmth of green summers seep down through stone and tundra to where it rested. It had watched ice sheets advance and retreat, had listened to the slow speech of glaciers grinding rock to silt. It had not known names then, or borders, or men. It had known only the pleasure of weight and the quiet of deep time. Then there had been voices. Small things moved upon its back. They dug and cut and burned. They fought among themselves, their lives no more than quick sparks in the long dark of its sleep. At first they had been no more to it than the scurry of ants. But they had grown louder. Some of these small things had dug deeper. They had sunk their roots. Not true roots like trees, but something like them, down toward its skin. They had poured odd bright energies along those roots, hot and sharp, and whispered in languages it did not know. It had almost ignored them, almost. Then other things had come. They were cold, not the slow, deep cold of the northern earth, but a crueler chill, a stillness that crept everywhere it touched an unmade motion. Where they walked, the small hot things fell silent and rose again, empty. Their cold bit even through the Titan's dreams. It had not liked that. When the root whisperers had shown it what would happen if that cold ate the world, if even the deep places where it lay were frozen in a stasis not of their choosing, it had stirred. They had asked it to move. Moving was difficult. It was so large. Its limbs were not limbs as the small things knew them. They were ranges and ridges, veined with rivers of stone. Its chest was a plain. The skull was a hill. To roll onto its back had taken an effort that had cracked the earth and made oceans tremble. But it had done it. It had lain along the world's edge then. Tia's spine arched, its shoulders against one mountain and its feet braced in another. The small hot things had piled stone and water atop it, layering ice and battlements, planting their tiny fortresses like barnacles. The root whisperers had wreathed it in their own kind of bindings, weaving spells through its substance, anchoring it. Then it had slept. The cold ones had come and pressed against its belly. Their chill had crawled up its sides, seeking cracks and crevices. But the bindings held. The Titan's slow, vast body was a barrier. As long as it lay there, as long as it slept with its back to the dark, the cold could not pass. Time had slipped by like melting snow. The small hot things had multiplied, fought, built, slaughtered, prayed. Their wars were no more to it than storms on the ocean. The root whisperers had dwindled, their voices growing fainter with each century, until only a few thin threads remained. Yet the bindings held. Until now, the cold ones had grown numerous. Their own power had increased. They had learned to sing in low frequencies the Titan could hear. Their song was not like the root whisperers' whispers. It was a scream. Wake, they howled. But they did not mean wake. They meant break. They flung their cold against its underside, trapping cracks, prying. It felt pieces of itself fracture, spalls of ice and stone shearing away to crash into the darkness below. The bindings groaned. The old magics creaked. In its long, slow way, the Titan considered. The first instinct was to roll onto its side, to throw off the things clinging to its back and belly, crush the shrieking cold ones beneath its mass, and then sink once more into deep rest. But the bindings made that difficult now. They had sunk too deep. To break them would be to tear its own flesh. Could endure the screaming. It had endured worse, in ages no memory still held. But it could feel the bindings failing. The cold was clever, inching into fractures, widening them. If it did nothing, the bindings would snap. Then the cold would flood, not around it, but through it, freezing even its dreams in a static, lifeless eternity. It did not know fear. It had no nerves for that. But it knew the difference between motion and stillness, between the slow, vast pulse of its own being and the absolute denial of that which the cold ones promised. It would not accept that. It had slept for a long time on its back at the world's rim. The small hot things had grown used to its stillness. They had begun to call that stillness a wall, as if it were a thing of theirs. They had forgotten that beneath their fortresses and gates, beneath their oaths and songs, there was something else. The Titans stretched a little. Men screamed. The dawn chose that moment to break. The first light of the unseen sun spilled across the top of the world, turning the cloud edge in the east a faint gold. It touched the top of the wall, and for an instant something answered. The ice glowed. It was not the dull blue sheen of old frost or the pale shine of packed snow. It was an inner light, thin but steady, running along the length of the wall like liquid fire under ice. It traced the cracks, the seams, the places where stone and frozen water met. It outlined for an instant a shape. John saw it and forgot to breathe. It was not entirely clear, not like a man's silhouette against the sky. It was too vast for that. But he had grown up in a world of towers and battlements, of stories of giants and kings. His mind reached instinctively for familiar forms. He saw a torso broad and massive, lying along the wall's length. He saw ribs like ridges, rising and falling as the wall took another titanic breath. He saw, in the distance to east and west, the suggestion of arms, one braced against the frostfangs, the other buried deep in the stone of the cliffs that fell to the shivering sea. Farther still, sensed more than seen, were legs, knees bent, feet dug into the earth like roots. And beneath Castle Black, beneath the gate and the tunnels and the heavy oak and iron doors, something immense shifted. "We should run," said a voice at his shoulder, thin and strained. John realized Dolorous Ed had clawed his way back to him, white-knuckled on the Merlin. "Where?" John asked, not taking his eyes off the light. "Anywhere that isn't under this," Ed said. The light intensified. It shot upward at intervals, narrow shafts like pillars, marking points along the wall where the old spells were strongest. The castle's men still held, the abandoned forts where moss had overgrown stone, the weirwood groves hidden in the shadow of the ice. It formed a web, a lattice of ancient power that had lain dormant for centuries, fed only by habit and fear. Bran felt it flare through him. In the cave, his back arched against the roots. The weirwood's glow swelled, bathing the chamber in sickly green-white radiance. Leaf shielded her eyes with a hand, her sharp teeth bared in a grimace. The three-eyed raven watched with that grave, hollow gaze and did not flinch. "Can you hold it?" he asked softly. Bran did not know. He was no builder, no ancient hero. He was a crippled boy from Winterfell tangled in roots in the dark. But he was also the vessel the old magic had chosen. He could feel the strands of power running through the wall, through the Titan's flesh, through the bindings that had held it in place for 1,000 years and more. He could feel them failing. "I can try," he rasped. "Do not try to hold it still," Leaf said. "You cannot. There is too much of it. Let it move as it must. Guide it." "How?" Bran whispered. "As a rider guides a great beast," Leaf said. "Not by pulling back always, but by running with it and nudging when you can." That made a kind of sense. Bran thought of the times he had ridden Summer's body through snow and forest, of how he had learned to lean into the wolf's instincts instead of fighting them. You could not make a wolf walk like a man. You could not make a wolf choose the path a man would choose. But you could whisper to it, and sometimes it listened. He reached again. This time he did not try to sink into the wall's icy weight. He sank into the thing beneath it. It was like plunging into an ocean. He had known size before. He had flown high with ravens, looked down on armies no larger than ants, forests no bigger than moss. He had thought that was vastness. This was different. The Titan's consciousness was slow and deep and broad. It welcomed him with no more attention than a man might give to a December snowflake landing on his hand. He sifted through currents of thought that were not thought as he knew it, feeling the way they moved around obstacles, the way they folded around impulses. He found the point where the Cold One's screech was striking the bindings, a jagged note of wrongness stabbing into the Titan's flank. He felt the creature's first instinctive response, to roll away, to push up, to shrug off the pressure. If it did that all at once, the bindings would snap like dry twigs. Bran whispered to it, not in words, not at first. Words would have been gnats against a mountain. He sent instead images. A world darkened under eternal storm, forests encased in ice, men and children and creatures frozen in mid-step. He showed it the Cold Ones marching across its back, their chill seeping into its own flesh and halting even its slow dreams. The Titan's rumble changed. It had seen such visions before, when the Weirwood children had first begged it to move. This time it understood more. It understood that the Cold One's song was a trick, a lure, a wedge to break its own girders. It changed the angle of its push. Instead of rolling to one side, it shifted along its length, like a man stretching without fully rising. Its back arched in places, then sank in others. The bindings groaned, but did not snap. The cracks lengthened, but the lattices of light flowed into them, filling, reinforcing. Ice avalanched from its flanks. On the wall, men screamed and prayed. "Down!" Jon shouted. He threw himself flat as a section of parapet a dozen yards to his left broke free, sliding off the outer edge in a thunder of snow and stone. It fell in slow, terrible clarity, tumbling end over end, and smashed into the forest below with a sound like the crash of distant surf. Wind roared through the gap it left, icy and sharp. Jon's face burned. He pushed himself upright again, gripping the nearest intact Merlin like a lifeline. Bells still clanged wildly below. He could hear shouts from the yard, the bellow of a frightened horse, the crash of something heavy toppling. "We need to get below," Ed said. "If the whole thing..." "No," Jon's teeth chattered. "If it falls, the yard is no safer than up here. If it doesn't..." He squinted along the length of the wall, following the path of the strange internal light. "We need to see what it's doing. What it's..." Ed stared at him. "You think the wall is doing something? What?" "Looking for its other boot." Jon did not answer. The air was too thin for words. He saw movement along the wall's face. They were not small movements. No man could move blocks of ice that size. No giant even could have shifted such weight with bare hands. But they moved nonetheless, sliding and slotting, grinding into new configurations as if guided by some unseen scheme. Ridges pushed out, hollows deepened, new angles formed. Slowly, horribly, a shape emerged. It was a face, not a man's face. A face too broad, too rough-hewn, the features suggested rather than carved. Jags of ice hinted at a brow. A vast protrusion of stone and snow might have been a nose. Deep cracks shadowed regions that could be eyes. They glowed faintly from within, the same thin golden light that ran along the wall's seams. "Seven, save us," Ed whispered. "It's looking at us." It was not really. That portion of the Titan's awareness was still fixed on the Cold Ones gathered to the north. But for an instant, as the light flared, something like attention swept along its back. Bran rode that wave. He saw the dead army through the Titan's perception. A patch of unnatural stillness pressing up against its belly, a zone where the normal low-level hum of life and movement that soaked the world had been muted. The Cold Ones were an absence as much as a presence, holes in the pattern of existence. The Titan disliked holes. It shifted again, more sharply now, pushing upward along its middle. On the far side of the wall, ice buckled. The ground shook as if the world were shrugging. The Night King stood upon his ridge and watched. The cold wind tugged at the tatters of his cloak. His blue eyes burned. He had seen walls before, walls of stone and flesh and faith. They had crumbled before him. He had raised their defenders to walk at his heels. He had known, from the first moment his dead gaze had fallen upon the human edifice that spanned the world's rim, that this one would fall as well. Yet this was different. The cold he exuded was ancient. It had come down with him from the first long night, from realms beyond the knowledge of men or children. The Titan's flesh was older still. It had been here when even he was not. It had lain under the first frozen sky, dreaming its slow dreams. It had watched his own rise with the mild contempt of mountains. He hated it for that. His song rose, supported by the chorus of his lieutenants, the other White Walkers, tall and gaunt and helmed in frost. Together their call bored into the wall, picking at weaknesses, vibrating at frequencies meant to split the bindings. The Titan pushed back. A shock ran through the Night King's army. For the first time since his making at the Weirwood altar, the ancient creature felt something like surprise. The wall was moving. A fissure split the ice before him, running horizontally along its face. For a heartbeat thou. GHT, it was failing as he had intended, cracking under his song. Then the crack widened, but did not break through. Instead, the lower portion of ice pushed up, the upper portion sinking, as if the whole edifice were flexing a muscle. The golden light flared brighter in the cracks. The Titan exhaled. Wind blasted out from the wall's face. A hurricane of frozen air that was not the Night King's own chill but something else. Something carrying the scent of deep earth and ancient stone. It struck the front ranks of wights like a hammer. Bones shattered. Bodies flew. The first two lines of the dead army were flung back in a ragged wave, limbs pinwheeling. Some were broken upon the frozen ground and lay still. Others twitched, trying to rise with pulverized spines. The cold ones did not move, their own chill carved channels through the opposing wind, insulating them. Frost surged along the ground where their power met the Titan's exhalation, binding and rebinding. But something had changed. The wall was no longer simply resisting. It was awakening. Far to the south, in Winterfell's Godswood, Sansa Stark knelt before the heart tree and felt the earth shake. It was only for a moment, a subtle tremor that made the snow sift from the Weirwood's red branches and sent a ring of ripples across the thin film of ice on the nearby pool. She might have thought it a trick of her imagination, some remnant of childhood unease before the carved face of the old gods. Then the face in the tree moved, just a little. Its red eyes seemed to deepen, the carved mouth twisting fractionally. A flake of dried sap cracked and fell from its lip like a fragment of frozen blood. For one instant, those eyes were not just red pigment and shadow. They were looking at her. She gasped. Behind her, someone's boots crunched on snow. "My lady!" She turned. Davos Seaworth stood at the edge of the clearing, cloak wrapped tight, his grizzled face creased with concern. "Did you feel that?" Sansa asked. "The shaking?" Davos nodded. I thought it was my old bones complaining about the cold." He looked past her at the heart tree and hesitated. "And that?" The Weirwood's face was still again, its eyes no more than carved holes, its mouth a grim slash. Could have been her imagination. Could have been 100 other things. "It's nothing," she said, though her voice trembled. "The Godswood is old. Things creak." Davos did not look convinced, but he was wise enough not to contradict the lady of the castle in her Godswood. "There's a raven," he said instead, "from Castle Black, brought by a man half-frozen and wild-eyed. He says the wall is—" He paused, as if the words would not come. Sansa rose, brushing snow from her skirts with fingers gone numb. "The wall is what?" "Moving," Davos said quietly. She stared at him. "You'd best see the letter," he added. In Meereen across the world, Daenerys Targaryen woke with a gasp, her heart pounding. For a moment she did not know where she was. The room was dark, the air heavy with the scent of extinguished torches and warm sand. Her bare skin prickled with sweat. Faint light filtered through the carved lattice of the window, hinting at the first gray of dawn. She had been dreaming. She remembered snow, endless snow, cold as death, stretching to the horizon. She had walked alone in it, barefoot, wearing only a thin white shift. The wind had howled. She had wrapped her arms around herself and shivered, breath pluming. Then she had seen it. A wall of ice, so vast it swallowed the sky. She had seen walls before, the thick red walls of Karth, the sandstone ramparts of Meereen. This had been something else. It had been alive. She had felt it in the way the air thickened, in the low rumble underfoot. The ice had glowed faintly from within, veins of light running through it like fire in frozen blood. A voice had filled her head, deep and slow, speaking no tongue she knew yet somehow understood. Wake, not to her, beyond her. She had seen then, far below, tiny black figures moving on the wall's back. She had seen, beyond it, an army of white shadows pressing up against its far side. She had reached for them, for the place where fire and ice met. Dragons had roared overhead, their cries shattering the dream. Now she sat up in bed, breathing hard. The stone beneath her toes was warm. She heard the faint stirrings of the pyramid around her. Servants rising, voices in the courtyard. Far above, one of her dragons screamed, a distant, echoing call. Khaleesi, a voice outside her door, muffled by wood and cloth. Forgive me, you called out. Missandei. Daenerys swung her legs out of bed and reached for the robe hanging nearby. Come. Her handmaid slipped inside, bowing her head. Her eyes were wide. You are well? She asked in the common tongue, her accent soft. You spoke. I thought you were in pain. I was dreaming. Daenerys shivered as the memory of cold clung to her. Of snow, of ice, of a wall. Missandei's brow furrowed. The same wall as before? Before. You spoke of a wall in your sleep some nights past, Missandei said, hesitant. You said it could fall or stand, that all the world would be broken upon that choice. I did not wish to wake you. Daenerys exhaled slowly. The wall is real, she said. Far to the north, beyond the Seven Kingdoms. It was built to keep something out. The dead, Missandei said quietly. She had heard the tales. All of Meereen had, by now. Dany's court buzzed with rumors of dead men walking in the far north, of white shadows and a winter that would not end. Yes, Daenerys said. The dead. She rose and crossed to the window. Outside, the sky above Meereen was a soft purple, the last stars fading. Smoke rose from 100 chimneys. The city sprawled below her like a pale stone beast, its slums and palaces crawling with life. She did not see that. She saw, overlaying it, the wall. She saw it glow. She her hand flat to the warm stone of the window frame and closed her eyes. The dream clung. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she could feel another hand somewhere far away, doing the same thing. A gloved palm pressed to ice, a young man's voice murmuring words she could not quite hear. Two hands, separated by half a world, touching two parts of the same living thing. What did you dream this time? Missandei asked. Daenerys opened her eyes and turned back, her silver gold hair falling around her shoulders like spilled moonlight. I dreamed the wall woke up, she said. In the cave, Bran Stark heard her words through no more than a faint echo, a ripple across the pond of magic that connected all things. But he was too busy holding on to notice. The Titan was moving in earnest now. He had done as Leaf said, not trying to restrain it entirely but to guide, to smooth, to nudge. When it wanted to roll fully onto its side, a motion that would have pulped everything clinging to its surface and snapped the bindings. He whispered images of collapse and cold and stillness until its instinct shifted. When it tried to shrug violently, he nudged that impulse into a slower stretch instead. It was like trying to steer a mountain down a slope. Still, he managed something. The wall rose. It did not rise all at once. Sections lifted in sequence, as if some enormous creature were pushing itself up on its elbows. The central portion, around Castle Black, arched first. East and west followed in staggering ripples. Where the bindings were strongest, the ice flexed but held. Where they were weaker, blocks sheared off and crashed to the ground below. In some places, old abandoned forts that had been crumbling for decades finally gave way, their stone walls tumbling from what had been ledges and was now a shifting incline. In others, hidden structures long buried in the ice broke free and jutted, strange angles in a new anatomy. The top of the wall tilted. Men slid, John grabbed a merlin with both hands and wrapped one leg around its base. Around him, brothers clung to crenellations, to each other, to anything solid. A man lost his grip and skidded toward the outer edge, boots scrabbling at the frost-slick stone. Another caught him by the cloak at the last moment, hauling him back with a roar. Inside, Bowen Marsh's voice cracked from somewhere near the stair tower, thin and shrill with terror. "Inside, you fools! Get below, before it crashes down. It's not falling," John shouted back, though he had no reason to be certain of that. His instincts screamed that to go below, into the tunnels and halls built into the wall's base, would be to crawl into the mouth of something that was just now deciding what to do with its teeth. He felt, in his bones, that hiding would not save them. The ice glowed brighter beneath his feet. Ghost came out of nowhere. A flash of white fur against the blue of the wall, claws skidding and finding purchase in cracks no man's boots could grip. The dire wolf had refused to go below when John climbed the steps earlier, pacing restlessly in the yard. Somehow he had found his way up anyway, perhaps through some half-forgotten tunnel, perhaps by pure stubborn wild magic. Now he barreled along the tilting walkway and flung himself at John. John's arms opened without thought. He caught the wolf's weight against his chest and spun, letting himself fall backward rather than be bowled toward the outer edge. He landed hard, Ghost a warm, snarling bulk on top of him, claws scraping at the stone as they slid a few feet. "Easy," John grunted. Ghost's red eyes met his. For a moment, the direwolf's gaze was not wolfish at all. There was something in it, some echo of another awareness. Brans? He thought of his little brother. No, not little anymore, wherever he was, and something in his chest tightened. The wall shifted again. The steepness eased slightly, the angle changing. John felt the pressure on his back lessen. Men groaned and began, slowly and cautiously, to find their feet. "John!" Someone shouted from the stair tower. "Jon Snow!" He turned his head. A wildling stood there, big as a bear, hair and beard flaming red, his sealskin cloak snapping in the wind. Tormund Giantsbane, eyes wide as sausages. "Do you see it, Crow?" Tormund bellowed, pointing north with one thick-fingered hand. "Do you see what your wall really is?" John pushed Ghost off and staggered upright, using the direwolf as a brace. He followed Tormund's pointing arm. The wall was lifting, not fully, not yet, but enough that beneath its lowest edge, along certain stretches where the ground sloped just so, a darkness was opening. It was not the darkness of a tunnel's mouth, the tidy blackness of structured space. It was the raw gap of something being pried up from earth that had long held it. For an instant, he saw motion in that gap. Not whites, not white walkers, something else. Roots, he thought wildly, thick as ship masts, glistening with icy sap, coiling down into the ground like a net being drawn up. "They said the horn of Joramun would wake giants from the earth," Tormund shouted over the roar. "They were wrong about the horn, but the song is true. Your wall is a bloody giant, Crow, and someone's blown it." John stared. "The walkers," he said slowly, the realization dawning like a cold sun. "They're trying to break it." Tormund spat into the wind. "Aye, and they're about to find out that some doors don't open the way you think." The Titan pushed up. It did not stand. That would have required a shattering of bindings, a forcible tearing of its own flesh from the earth. But it raised itself enough that its weight shifted dramatically. The pressure on its underside decreased in places, increased in others. The Cold One's song, tuned to a particular configuration of stress, faltered. Cracks that had been widening under the Night King's influence now closed, the light within them hardening. Bran steered as best he could. He could not stop the Titan from moving. He could only guide the direction of that motion. He bent himself along its spine like a rider leaning into the motion of a horse, whispering to muscles the size of continents. He redirected one push a fraction, another a degree more. Small changes at this scale had massive consequences. He made sure the strongest lifts happened where the wall was anchored to living rock, where mountains could bear the extra strain. He softened shifts near the castles where men clung, though he could not save them all. He felt stones tumble, ice shear, bodies fall. He could not stop to count them. The Titan rolled its shoulders. On the northern side, beneath the Night King's army, the ground buckled. A ridge rose like a swelling wave under the front ranks of whites. They toppled forward in ungainly heaps, bones splintering, frozen flesh tearing. Some were crushed under their fellows. Others slid toward newly opened crevasses, vanishing into darkness. The cold ones themselves staggered. They had not expected resistance. The Night King thrust his spear into the ground like a staff, steadying himself. Frost snapped outward from the point of contact, anchoring his feet. His lieutenants followed suit, their own weapons biting into the ice. They raised their cold song again, louder, harsher, desperate. The Titan roared. The sound was too low for human ears to hear. Bran felt it as a vibration that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. The bindings along the wall flared bright, the weblands of light turning from thin gold to blinding white. The ice itself sang in answer, a high keening note that split the air. The Night King's song faltered. For the first time, the ancient entity at the heart of the dead army knew something like opposition. Not dead sticks and broken swords, not small creatures squeaking defiance. Something of its own order, old as it was, vast as it was. Fury stirred in that frozen heart. It raised a hand. There were things older than even the Titan, older than this world's shaping, older than the first dawn. The Night King was a shard of that elder cold, given form and focus by the rituals the children of the forest had once used to create a weapon and had instead birthed a doom. Within him, in the blue crystal of his being, lay the memory of other walls in other realms, of barriers broken and worlds drowned in ice. He drew on that now. The air around him grew so cold the very light seemed to slow. Frost crackled across the sky itself, a spiderweb of hoarfrost filigreeing empty air. The sound of his power was not a horn this time, not a screech. It was a crack. It ran through reality like a fault line, reaching toward the wall. Bran felt it coming. He had no words for what it was. It was a fracture in something deeper than ice or stone, a breaking in the weave of magic that underpinned the bindings. If it reached the Titan unopposed, it would not simply crack the wall. It would sever the channels through which he was guiding it. He would be blind. Now, he gasped, we need help. Then call for it, the three-eyed raven said. His voice was faint, like something heard from a great distance. Bran reached, not along the wall this time, but along the threads that connected him to other minds, other hearts. He followed the taste of wolf in his blood, the echoes of crow's wings, the distant, stinging tang of dragonfire. He sent his own cry out along those lines, as loud as he could, a child's shout in a storm. Help! In Winterfell's Godswood, Arya Stark stood with her hand on the heart tree and closed her eyes. She had never been one for prayer. Her memories of her father kneeling in this very place were a jumble of childish boredom and snowflakes on her lashes. The gods had never seemed to do much for him in return. But she felt something now, something in the tree's grain beneath her fingertips, like a thrum. She opened her eyes. The carved face in the weirwood was different. It had always been solemn and deep, its eyes dark with dried sap, its mouth a hard line. Now, for an instant, she saw her brother's features flicker across it. Bran's face, younger and older at once, eyes white and empty, mouth moving without sound. The tree's red eyes seemed to bleed light. Bran, she whispered. In Meereen, Daenerys stood on the terrace of her pyramid with Drogon's shadow passing overhead and felt an odd tug in her chest, like the pull of a distant tide. She looked north, truly north, beyond Slaver's Bay, beyond the smoking ruins of Valyria, beyond the narrow sea. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard a boy's voice. In the frozen forest near the wall, the old wildling woman threw back her head and laughed. The boy at her side stared at her as if she had gone mad. What is it? He cried over the roar of moving ice. What's funny? He's calling, she said. Her eyes were bright and wet. The tree boy, the wolf boy, the broken boy who is not broken anymore. He's tugging at the old roots, he is, and they're tugging back. The Titan shuddered. It had not expected companionship. It had known the root whisperers long ago, had felt their thin, bright presences skitter along its flanks as they bound and coaxed. It had felt their voices fade over centuries, one by one, until only a faint hum remained. Now, suddenly, there was a different kind of presence. Small, bright, fierce. It was in the roots. It was in the ice. It was in the wolf padding along its back, and the girl touching the tree far to the south, and the dragons wheeling high above a distant desert. It tugged on threads of magic that had lain slack for ages and made them sing. The crack of the Night King's power approached. The Titan gathered itself. Bran pushed. He poured himself into that arm-thick of magic as if it were his own body, flinging the full weight of his will behind the Titan's movement. He felt the cold ft's edge like a blade against his spirit. He did not care. Bran the boy might have flinched. Bran the Green Seer, with the wall beneath him and the world around him, did not. Now he thought. Now, the Titan heaved. The wall, which had been rising in increments, surged upward along its central third, not an inch at a time but yards. The motion was terrifyingly fast for something so huge. On the southern side, the walkway tilted nearly vertical for a heartbeat, sending men scrambling for anything to hold. On the northern side, vast slabs of ice and stone tore free and crashed down like avalanches of frozen boulders into the Night King's ranks. The crack of cold power met this rising wave of motion and was deflected, skidding along a surface no one had ever intended to be used in such a way. It sheared off into the sky, where it burst in a shower of invisible shards that fell as razor-fine snow over 1,000 miles of tundra. The Night King staggered. He had not thought it possible. His song faltered. His blue eyes burned brighter, then dimmed, then flared again as he rallied his will. The dead around him quivered, uncertain, their empty gazes turning toward the shifting wall. On top of that wall, Jon Snow finally lost his grip. The sudden surge upward had been too much. His hands tore from the frost-slick Merlin. For an instant he hung between sky and forest, arms windmilling, Ghost's teeth snapping at the air where his sleeve had been. Then he fell. Time stretched. He had fallen before, as a boy, from a tower in Winterfell. He remembered the sick lurch of empty air, the way the walls had rushed past. He remembered the crump of impact, the taste of blood, the long darkness afterwards. He had thought then that he was dead. He thought it again now. The wind tore at his cloak. The wall's rough face blurred beside him, blue-white and seamed with glowing cracks. He saw the ground below, a patchwork of snow and stone and wooden outbuildings, rushing up. Ghost howled. Something caught him. It was not a hand. It was not a rope. It was ice. A ridge of it surged outward from the wall, forming itself in the space where he fell as if it had been waiting. It jutted from the face like a vein of frost-swollen stone, rough and sloping. Jon hit it hard enough to drive the air from his lungs, slid, clawed, and came to a painful, undignified halt against a jag of ice. He lay there, gasping, staring up. Above him, Ghost's white head peered over the edge of the wall, ears flattening in as much astonishment as a wolf could show. Behind the dire wolf, Tormund's wide, bearded face appeared, eyes bulging. "You all right down there, Crow?" the wildling shouted. Jon coughed. "No. Good." Tormund grinned, mad and bright. "Means you're still alive." The ridge he lay upon vibrated beneath him, felt like muscle. He rolled, slowly, carefully, and pressed a palm to the ice. It thrummed, faint but steady, in time with something deeper than his own heart. "You're alive too," he whispered. The wall did not answer in words. It didn't need to. The proof of its movement was all around him. He looked down again. The forest below seemed closer than it had been from the parapet. The wall was not as vertical here as it once had been. Its face was sloping slightly, like the flank of a great beast half risen. A shadow moved at the base of it. He squinted. Men were running, tiny black dots against the snow, for the gate tunnels and the yard. Some were clustering at the base of the wall where pieces had torn free, scrambling over piled ice. Wildlings and Black Brothers both, their usual distinctions erased by terror. Beyond them, at the treeline, he saw others. They were not running. They watched. "Old gods," he murmured. "Keep them safe." Below, one of the watching figures, the old wildling woman with the boy, nodded as if she had heard him. "Keep yourself safe, Crow," she muttered. "You're part of this now, whether you will it or no." The Titan rolled its shoulders again. Bran clung. He was losing himself. He had poured so much of his awareness into guiding the Titan that the edges of his own self had begun to blur. He could no longer clearly remember what it felt like to have legs. He had vague impressions of Winterfell's courtyards, of the feel of a wooden practice sword in his hand, of Hodder's slow, steady breathing beneath him. They felt like someone else's memories. "Bran," Leaf's voice came, distant but clear. "Come back a little. You must remain yourself to guide it." "I can't," he whispered. The words echoed along roots and ice. "If I let go." "You will not let go," said the three-eyed raven. "You will learn to hold and return. There is no other path." Bran was not sure if the old man was speaking of the wall or of something else entirely. It did not matter. The Titan needed him still. He felt the Night King gathering himself for another assault. He felt the dead army shifting, trying to find stable footing on ground that would not stay still. He felt the bindings along the wall straining. He realized, with a sudden sharp clarity, that this was not sustainable. The Titan could not stay half awake like this, could not hover between sleep and stride, not for long. It had made its initial decision, to move rather than be broken. Now it would have to choose again, lie down fully and risk the cold finding a different path around it. Or stand. The thought was terrifying. He pushed deeper. He found, in the Titan's vast, slow consciousness, an echo of something he recognized. Annoyance. It had been disturbed. It was being screamed at by cold things and tugged at by hot things. His back ached. It wanted to change position. Standing would hurt. It might break loose connections that had woven through its flesh over ages. Roots, rocks, rivers, men's fortresses. It might crack itself in ways that would never mend. But the alternative was worse. If it lay down again, the cold would keep singing. The bindings would eventually fail. His dreams would be locked in ice forever. It did not want that. Bran saw then that this was not just about men or children or walkers. This was about the Titan's own survival. He could work with that. He scented a flood of images, not of men kneeling at weirwood trees or children dancing in leaffall, but of long, slow summers, of ice sheets withdrawing, of mountains feeling the warmth of sun on slopes that had known only snow, of deep stone humming with contentment as water trickled through fractures, not froze. "Choose," he whispered, in the only language the Titan fully understood, that of time and change. The Titan chose. It stood. The world's edge changed. In Castle Black's yard, men fell to their knees as the ground bucked like a live thing. Horses screamed, their eyes rolling white. The great gate tore free from its housing with a roar, its hinges twisted beyond recognition. Outbuildings collapsed in clouds of snow and splinters. On top of the wall, the walkway tilted, then leveled, then tilted again. Some brothers had the sense to flatten themselves and cling. Others tried to run. A few simply curled into balls and howled. On the northern side, the ground dropped. Slowly, inexorably, the Titan pushed itself up. It began at the center, near Castle Black. Then the motion rippled outward like the raising of a spine. The enormous mass of ice and stone that had lain along the world's rim for long centuries pulled away from the earth that had cradled it. Roots snapped, rock fractured, caverns that had been dry for millennia filled with falling debris. The wall did not become fully vertical on the southern side. Men would have been flung off like fleas. It instead became a slope steeper than any mountain but not sheer, the angle constantly shifting as the Titan found a new balance. The northern face, however, changed dramatically. What had been a 90-degree cliff of ice became, in places, an overhang. The Titan's chest rose, pushing out over the dead army. Slabs of ice the size of keeps sheared off and crashed down, obliterating ranks of wights in plumes of powdered snow and bone. The Night King's ridge cracked under his feet. He leapt, impossibly graceful, to a new foothold as the ground gave way. His lieutenants did likewise. Between one breath and the next, a yawning chasm opened where his vanguard had been standing moments before, wide and deep and dark. From its depths came a sound that none of them had heard in an age: rushing water. The Titan's movement had broken through to an underground river. Liquid water poured from fissures in the ice, carving new channels through the collapsing ground. It steamed where it met the Night King's cold, then froze in strange, jagged sculptures, only to be shattered again by falling debris. The dead fell in. Those near the edge toppled, their balance lost. They pinwheeled into the chasm, smashing against protruding rocks, disintegrating into pieces. Others were dragged down by the press of bodies behind them, pulled into the darkness by the weight of their own army. The Night King watched, his expression distant. He did not feel pity. The dead were tools. It mattered only inasmuch as it reduced his available force. What concerned him more was the wall itself. It was no longer a wall. It was a back arching. Great humps of ice and stone rose along its length, peaks and valleys forming a new, monstrous anatomy. The castle's men had built upon it clung like crusts of barnacles on a whale as it moved. Some crushed, others relocated. Towers toppled, parapets broke, but the core mass held. Error in message stream, retry,